I've lived in New Jersey my entire life. I've been a fiction writer, actor, playwright, blogger, gourmet chef, home renovator, event planner, landscape architect, and decorator. Now, I'm married to a professional drummer who is also an award-winning photographer, so the arts have always been really important to me. There are so many people in New Jersey that are involved in the arts, and I am planning to talk to all of them. Well, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. And I'm inviting you to listen in. I'm Lucille Sapio, talking arts and culture, and this is Hazlitt Coffee Talk. Last month, for the first time in over a year, I was able to go to a live performance, and it was at the Algonquin Arts Theatre in Manasquan. How nice to be out in public and to be seeing a live performance. And by the way, it was really good. And while I was there, I was able to tap Pam Ward, the executive director, and get her to be my next interview. Pam and I have known each other since our days at the Dam Site Dinner Theater, but she's gone so much farther in the arts. But I'm going to let you hear her talk about it. Hello, Pam.
Hello, Lucille.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
I'm going to jump right in and ask you about some of the plays that you do at the Algonquin.
Okay.
Most plays heavily feature male roles, and we know from our experience at the Dam Site that many, if not most, of female roles in a lot of plays are either window dressing or simply bit parts.
Mm-hmm.
How much of a concerted effort has the Algonquin made to find scripts with strong female roles?
That's an interesting question because I think I can speak for most local theaters in saying that by a lot, the preponderance of talent that comes out for shows is female. We tend to have a much greater selection of female performers than we do of male performers. And you have multiple theaters kind of duking it out over the few men that are out there that have the skill and have the talent to handle major roles. But you also have to take into account also what your audience is going to come out to see. So there are so many different elements that go into choosing each show. It's commonsensical for us to be looking for shows that have strong female characters because we have so many strong female performers.
Is it hard to find scripts with strong female characters?
In the more nostalgic scripts, it is. In the more contemporary pieces, you tend to see the women playing a much more prominent role. As for instance, in last season, we had Mamma Mia. Then the men are just sort of part of the denouement. They are not the featured roles in the show. We were lucky enough to have Steel Magnolias last year, which is all females.
And the productions that you do are both professional and amateur. Correct? So how do you balance the two?
To be very frank, cost is a huge part of that. We would never be in a situation where we would be charging people $135 a seat to see a show. It really comes down to a balance of how we keep our ticket prices accessible to everybody, because the other thing that we want to do is get as many people seeing theater as we can. So as we begin to work through our budgets every year, these are the things that come into play.
What other live venues do you consider to be your top competition? Would it be the New Brunswick stages?
Nationwide, we look at theaters as being in tiers.
Mm-hmm.
For us, in the immediate area, in direct competition with us would be a company like Axelrod, right outside of Asbury Park, or Phoenix. Their home is at the Basie, but also, college theaters where you have pre-professionals and professionals and, longtime seasoned professionals who are basically all working together on the same stage. I think when you get up to the State Theater level or McCarter or George Street, they're the next tier up from us.
They're sort of like off Broadway.
Right. And a lot of times that, like a Two River, that's what they're always looking to do. And they develop a lot of new stuff, which we don't do.
Now, how did you start in the arts?
I really wish I had an answer to that. That was not just so entirely random. My parents basically at gunpoint forced me to join a church choir. When I got into high school, I decided that I would audition for a musical. When I got to college, I worked to put myself through school, and one of the jobs that I happened to have gotten was working in a dinner theater. At the Club Benet, I wound up going from that dinner theater to the Dam Site, which was where I met all of you guys.
Yeah.
I wound up taking a class in theater education, and at that point I decided to focus exclusively on theater. And I was very fortunate in that I have always worked in theater or in the arts.
Now, where did you see your career heading? Did you think acting, directing, administration?
Teaching was my bread and butter for about 10 years, and I really enjoyed it. And the thing that I really enjoyed about it was seeing kids that were very much like I was when I was a kid. I would be dealing with kids and they would be very reluctant to participate, even to the point of hostility. And, teachers would be like, well, they're just a problem. And it's like, no, the kid is just scared to death. And it was really a fascinating process to me to watch how you could use theater to really bring these kids out in a way that they felt very comfortable in and very safe in.
Well, because you're being someone else.
Right. And that was really appealing to them. And once you sort of got through the shell and made them feel safe enough and comfortable enough to do it, it was really amazing what you could accomplish. So I was really working in theater education for a long time. First, I was at a little tiny company in Princeton, and then we got sort of absorbed into McCarter. So I wound up at McCarter for 10 years. And then I went to a New York company for a couple of years, but then I got recruited up to Trinity Rep in Rhode Island. I had a class, it was a high school class, and they had to do something on Shakespeare. And the teacher was just tearing her hair out. And she was like, this is the worst group of kids. They're really resistant. They're real wise guys, and I can't do anything with them.
You know what that reminds me of? When people go, oh, it was a really bad audience.
Yeah. No,
it's not the audience.
And that's what I've always found with teachers in Shakespeare. It's like, it's not Shakespeare. You're teaching it wrong. So they gave me this class of kids, and they were tough. But I found every sexy, expletive-filled, violent scene that I could in Shakespeare. And by the end of it, I had some of the best Shakespeare performances I had ever seen from kids. When we broke it down, they really related to it. And I have to say that the audience of students who could have been really awful were so supportive. But they were supportive because the performances were great. And they gave them a standing ovation, and it was really one of those moments that for all of the other times I'd look at it and go, why am I doing this? It's like, this is why I'm doing it.
So many school districts have really cut back or eliminated arts education. I know one of the goals of the Algonquin is to provide an arts education to local residents and visitors to the area. But isn't that the role of schools? How can we change it so that schools reclaim that responsibility? How do we make boards of education see the value in the arts?
I've been having this same conversation for the 35 years that I've been involved in the arts. This is a societal question. You can do more than one thing at a time. It's impossible to teach one subject at a time because they all touch on each other. You can't understand science without understanding language. Algebra totally defeated me. But when I got to college, I had to work with a scenic designer. I had to work with a lighting designer. And the first day that I sat in a lighting designer's lecture, I learned the Pythagorean theorem and what it meant.
Because you could see the practical application
Because
of it.
Suddenly it was like, oh, the cone of a light is a triangle. And in order to calculate throw, and in order to calculate brightness, and in order to calculate how much of the stage I'm covering, I have to be able to understand it. And when I saw the practical application, it made total sense to me.
I had to take a class, Quantitative Methods of Urban Analysis.
Wow.
Oh my God, thank God that he graded us on a curve. But when I got into radio and started dealing with ratings,
right,
it's all about statistics.
Yes.
And I became the expert in my office on statistical analysis of audiences. It's because I could see the relationship in real time.
What was interesting to me was after all of those years of struggle with geometry and trigonometry, suddenly when I was working with lighting designers who didn't want to be bothered with the nuts and bolts, they would turn to me and say, here, figure this out. And there I would be. And it was effortless because it made sense.
Yeah.
It was in the context of something. Teaching theater and history is the easiest thing in the world. Because you can trace the arc of humankind by following theater. It's just a storytelling process. What's more mathematical than music?
So aside from grants, where else does the financial backing for the Algonquin come from?
We are in a very rare position for most theaters because we earn about 75% of our revenue. We do fundraisers, but attending fundraisers is one of the worst ways to raise money because your overhead is so high.
Have people been more or less generous over the past year with
They've been
COVID?
incredibly generous. People at the Algonquin treat the Algonquin like their living room. And the people who come all the time were calling us before we were reaching out to them. We had a lot of our corporate support respond instantly. They just came out of the woodwork and were like, how much do you need? We also have a couple of incredibly generous regular donors. They were like, we'll match everything to $10,000. It was an incredible boost to us between our donors and the little bit that we were able to continue to earn. And then, of course, through the federal funding programs, the organization never lost stability.
I know how I think people describe me, but how do you think people describe you?
I don't have the slightest idea. And I have to say, I stopped being concerned about it a while ago. Years ago, a person that I know described me to another person as being the nicest person he had ever met. And I didn't realize at the time that this was not a compliment, because the subtext of being nice is this is somebody who'll do things for you and not expect anything in return.
You're a pushover.
Right. So I decided at that point that it was kind of important to not be perceived as that person. And what has happened, I think, is now the opposite, is that I have people who are afraid of me, which I don't understand. When you have control over something that somebody wants or they want to do or what have you, that also, I think, changes the way people perceive you.
What is it about you that people either don't know or just don't get?
I am not a social person.
And I wouldn't have known that.
I am very uncomfortable with people I don't know. I'm very private. I'm never going to be the life of the party.
We are so completely opposite.
Well, and the thing is, it's sort of the opposite of my professional persona. My professional persona is very extroverted because it's required. I've gotten to the point where it no longer fills me with anxiety or anything else, because when I first started to have to be a boss, it was really uncomfortable. Personally, I'm not a person who's going to go out and seek out groups of people. In fact, I'll do anything to avoid being in groups of people. It's just not a comfortable situation for me. And I think a lot of the time people can misinterpret that as not liking them, and it has nothing to do with like or dislike. It just has to do with my own comfort level and what I like to do. Mostly I'm solitary.
Do you have a secret talent?
Secret?
Well,
I don't know if it's
hidden
secret.
talent. Let's say a hidden talent.
What would be surprising to more people would be that I'm very good with power tools. I would say my secret talent would be being able to build things and fix things. And
even though you're a girl.
Well, and it really infuriates me because my father was a contractor and I grew up working with him. He would fix forklifts in our garage as a sideline to his regular job. So we were always learning as we were going along. So how to splice a broken pipe and, how to replace sheetrock, how to repair holes, how to paint correctly, how to cut molding, how to put in a shelf. I've owned 3 houses, and all 3 of them were wrecks when I got them, and I lived in them while we renovated them. Way back, the first time that I bought a house, my father said to me while we were working on it, he was like, we should get somebody to come in and film this. And I was like, oh, yeah, right.
Who's going to be interested?
Right. And it was like, well, we could have done this 20 years before.
You could have been the original
I could have been on
fixer-upper.
HGTV.
You could have been the Joanna and Chip.
That's right. And I missed my opportunity.
Yeah. Let me make this the last question. And it's a 2-part question.
Okay.
What was the biggest mistake you've made in your career? And what was the best decision?
I would say the biggest mistake, I didn't work harder at being a professional actor. I was so scared of failing that I didn't really give it the shot that I think that I should have. I was not one of those kids that was like an actor, and I had to work hard to get every performance out of myself. And I did work hard at it. Just because of my looks, I was never going to be an ingenue. I was going to be a character.
Although there are probably more roles for character actors.
Absolutely. But I just went, this is a waste of time. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not, all of the things that you're told over and over and over again from actually going into the profession, mostly by acting teachers who are in the same pool of actors that you're going to be competing in. It scared the living daylights out of me.
Yeah.
I was afraid of failing at that, which is really weird because I was not particularly afraid of failing at anything else. It was just that one particular particular area.
What part would you really love to play?
That's hard to say because there are just so many good ones. If you asked me this 20 years ago, I would have said some female ingenue from musical theater. And now I look at it and I say, ugh.
Yeah.
They're the worst roles.
Yeah, they're so,
they are the worst roles. They just don't have, they have no substance to them. And ironically, the part that I've always wanted to play, Macduff, either Macbeth or Macduff. I have just always found them absolutely fascinating.
I really, really wanted to do Same Time next year.
Oh, I love that play
with Dennis
too.
Lynch.
Oh my God, that would have been fantastic.
I wanted that part so badly.
That is a wonderful play.
Yeah.
And we have been.
That's the thing. Neil Simon wrote a lot of good female parts.
Well, I did Brighton Beach Memoirs last year. We had a show where somebody dropped out and they had to replace them on short notice. And I was like, why didn't you just ask me? I would have done it. And then the next year he was like, would you play this role? And I played Kate, the mother, in Brighton Beach Memoirs. And it's a great role.
Yeah.
But you know what's funny is in doing local theater, I work with directors who were terrific directors. Mm-hmm. And I work with directors who were awful directors. You know, I thought, you get to a certain level and that's not true anymore. Well, it's exactly the same. You know, when you start to equate what you do in the theater with any other profession, because it is a profession, you understand that there are people who got where they are because they're related to somebody, because nobody knows what they're talking about and they just assume they're smarter than them or whatever.
Well, and it's the same in business, though. When I was working for a company that sold training to the pharmaceutical industry. Now, I had never sold training before, and I'd never worked in the pharmaceutical industry. But I'd been selling for over 25 years. So we would put together pitches, and I would think I wouldn't do it this way, but I guess they know what they're doing. I realized finally, after a year and a half, he doesn't know how to sell to the pharmaceutical industry. Selling is selling.
Right. And I would say, to go back to an earlier question, that, the smartest thing was beginning to trust that I knew what I was talking about in any area, and not always assuming that somebody else knew better than I did, because I think a lot of people wind up wasting a lot of time assuming people know what they're talking about. And then I saw this great quote from Ricky Gervais.
I love him.
And it said, it's don't worry, nobody else knows what they're doing either. And that's sort of become like my mantra. But I'm going to trust, based on my experience, that I know what I'm talking about and I know what needs to be done and I can tell you what needs to be done. And if it doesn't work out, you can hold me completely accountable. And the other thing that I found is that as soon as you say you can hold me completely accountable, you've already put yourself in the stratosphere above almost everybody else.
Nobody else will say
because nobody else is going to say that. So once you've just said I'm going to put my neck on the block here, then everybody just trusts you must know what you're doing.
Pam, thanks so much for spending this time with me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Sorry, I told you have to tell me to stop talking. I'll just rattle on and on.
I love the arts and I love to talk, and that's why I'm talking to local artists. And if you like listening, then subscribe to my podcast. You can do it on this page, on iTunes, or anywhere you get podcasts. I'm Lucilla Sapio, and this is Hazlitt Coffee Talk.